So my name is Miljan Stamenkovic. I'm the head of sales at Tuum. We're a core banking platform, one of the 4th-generation core banking platforms that are present here in the Middle East, but also across the globe.
I'm Rohit Mathew. I co-lead MENA financial services for Publicis Sapient. 2 decades that I've been here in the MENA region. Prior to that, I was in the industry in India, covering the US and Southeast Asia. So you can say I've seen both sides of the coin.
As a progressive modernization is really a de-risked approach to transforming your entire tech stack. And if you think about it, the biggest risk today for any bank is actually thinking about a big bang approach and the failure of it. And of course, I empathize with the bankers who actually think about it that way. However, if you think about the approach is how do you de-risk it? How do you start small and build certain capabilities by hollowing out your existing technology stack and build step by step to get to the point that you want. Transformation and progressive modernization it's a marathon. So it's important that you start with a first win. So your first sprint that you have to win and come to that point that you can actually come slowly to replacing the entire tech stack of your organization.
I was in another panel as well earlier today, and what's nice to see, and I've been here long enough and I've seen the growth as well. You've got a number of cities in the GCC who've now started becoming global financial services hubs as well. And if you look at, for example, Saudi Arabia as well, with the whole Vision 2030, the focus on FSDP, the focus on the thriving financial services sector as well. But if you see the underlying of that, you need to have a core modern infrastructure as well. Now, from a regulator's perspective, some of these regulators in the region, they are really flag bearers. And if you see some of the work, they've been pushing the whole digital agenda as well. The sovereign wealth funds, the family offices, again, we've seen them pushing the digital agenda as well. Take Saudi Arabia as an example. The kind of demographics and the population that we have here, it's a relatively young population, digitally savvy, high internet penetration, high smartphone penetration. So there is an absolute focus in terms of customer experience, customer preferences changing as well. Now, from a traditional bank's perspective, the legacy systems were just not built to change an application on the fly or to integrate with the broader ecosystem of players as well. So that puts a lot of pressure on your traditional banks in this region, be it in terms of how do you move to a much more customer-first model? How do you focus on the entire customer experience, the personalization, the hyper-personalization as well, the whole ease of experience, the omnichannel approach, the multi-channel approach. How do you move the client context from one channel to another channel? And I say this pretty often, it's about the business, the operating model, and the tech and infrastructure models coming together as well. And from a tech and infrastructure, be it in terms of composable, microservices-based architecture, cloud, hybrid cloud as well. And you can't have a discussion without talking about AI. We as Sapient, we do quite a bit of work in terms of AI globally as well as in the region. And I can tell you, the discussions I'm having with the banks here in the region, everybody's doing something or the other on AI. But what I always tell them is it's not about the use cases anymore. You put on ChatGPT your issues, you get a plethora of use cases. But it's about how do you prioritize it? How do you do the POC? How do you find the business value? And at the end, it's not a show and tell. How do you scale it? And again, that comes back to modern infrastructure. And I'm talking here traditional banks, but I can say the same thing, and we're hearing announcements of new digital banks here in Money 2020 as well. But I'd say the same thing will be true for the digital banks, the neo banks as well. While they have the advantage of a modern light core, cloud native solutions as well, they have also work to do as, for example, how do you really get your customers in the deposit side, on the lending side, across the entire value chain of banking. So I'd say there's work in terms of modernization, both for the traditional banks, much more of course, but there's things that the neo bank shouldn't ignore as well.
Having a dual core or multi-core strategy in today's day and age is actually something very much acceptable and it's recommended. However, if we talk about this regional context and in the context of conventional banking and Islamic banking, the industry paradigm or proposition was always it does require 2 cores. Now you would argue, does that bring double the licenses, double the IT overhead? And I think that's the primary cost. But what's typically unseen is the hidden cost of it. So how do you run the entire customer journey or customer relationship if you have these two legacy cores in your dual core tech stack? And that's the biggest challenge actually that most of the banks have. So I would reframe that and talk about, how do you architect a single platform that can support you both with your conventional banking as well as your Islamic banking proposition, and take it from there.
If you look at the banks here, the local banks, and I'm talking about GCC specifically as well, they are the backbone of the financial services ecosystem. And the reason is they have built this over decades of trust, decades of accessibility, decades of comprehensive services that they have done. And I'd even argue that the returns that they have given the shareholders is sometimes higher than the global peers as well. Of course, it's a factor of higher net interest margins, it's a factor of higher revenue to asset ratio. They're well capitalized as well, the banks in the region, but the ROEs are still pretty healthy as well. So again, I'd say in terms of particularly core modernization, there's definitely opportunities here for the banks, but it needs to be seen how you do it, what's the business case as well.
10 years ago, it was a very different discussion. If you talk to banking IT or even the business and suggesting you have your main workloads in the cloud, the answer would be no. It was very risky thing to even discuss and then bring it up in front of the regulator. So it's not something to, people were hesitant, so to speak. I had a client who said, bringing my emails to the cloud is one thing, but bringing my main workloads to the cloud is a no-go. Today, the things have definitely changed, and the risk appetite has changed. So I think still the conventional thinking maybe is the approach of many vendors and consultants, start slowly, think about what are the first less important workloads that you want to bring to the cloud. We argue with that comment, obviously. I think the idea is more of how do you compete with the digital challenges? So while banks are using still this costly gold-plated system that runs on their premises that is closed off, core platforms are not that anymore. They're open platforms of innovation. So while you're doing that as a bank, your digital challengers are creating new revenue streams using cloud-based solutions and really competing with the banks that are still on their legacy system. So that's a no-go. Therefore, the best way probably is to think about what is the first use case, say SME lending, cloud-based solution you can bring to the market and start from there. That way you capture certain markets and then you continue your cloud journey, so to speak.
We as Sapient, of course, we do the entire value chain in terms of core modernization. That is in terms of defining the case for change, the business case, the business value, doing the future state target architecture as well. What's the impact in terms of the technology, the business, then doing the entire requirements, design, the building, the testing, the deployment, the change management, program management. We bring our own tools as well. So if you see, there's a lot of synergy there between the likes of Tuum and our Publicis Sapient. The other thing I'd say is when we go to clients jointly as well, we can co-create together and co-deliver for them customer journeys. How does the product roadmap look? How does it map to the products and the platform's parameters as well? So that's the other key aspect. And if you look at these typical core modernization journeys, it involves a number of participants. It needs to have your compliance team, it needs to have your product team, it needs to have your business team, it needs to have the vendors, the consultants working together towards one shared success. And that's why I think these partnerships are absolutely critical, and I expect to see much more of the Tuum Publicis Sapient collaboration in the days and weeks to come.
Yeah, we oftentimes talk about a sidecar strategy, right? How do you start with a particular use case that creates the biggest proof of value, as we discussed earlier, right? So if you think about this region, the cornerstone of any national vision here in the region is SME lending. So SMEs have been underserved by larger banks due to their legacy technology as well, but also the way the traditional banks would either target their retail customers or corporate customers. So they're basically giving up this growth market due to their incapacity to serve them properly. So perhaps SME lending, if you see some of the digital challenges, that's exactly what they do. They target them with a rapid deployment of new digital lending solutions, whether it's loan origination, loan management, and then take it from there. So I think that would be a phenomenal use case to start with.
You know, I was talking to the CIO of one of my clients recently, a bank in the region as well. And he was telling me that about 60 to 70% of his IT and developers team effort is spent on bug fixing and maintenance. And that's pretty unfortunate. They should be doing much more value-added, innovative related work. Now, let's also be clear, these core modernization journeys, it's not something that you do every day. It's not a 3-week, 6 weeks program. It's fraught with challenges as well. And we at Sapient have gone through this. We're doing this in the region. We're doing this globally as well. But there's a few things that you really need to keep in mind, particularly in the Middle East, but I'd say it's a playbook that works globally as well. You need to be very clear in terms of why are you doing this, in terms of what is that case for change as well. Because you can't have your goalposts changing, and that's a complete recipe for disaster. The same way, your total cost of ownership. It's not a bucket which can just keep overflowing as well. The other thing is, even on your total cost of ownership, what are you comparing it against? You need to be looking at what's the business case for doing the change, but at the same time, what's the case of not doing anything? What's the business and operational risks as well? So that's one key aspect to keep in mind. The other key aspect is, we talked about the cost. We talked about earlier change management, underestimating effort around change management, program management. The other thing that I see quite a bit in the region as well, we've got banks that say we want to do everything ourselves, and doing custom. And sometimes, it's something which I can't fathom the logic sometimes of that, because one, you've got fintechs, leverage what you can use, create bespoke solutions and augment what the fintechs don't. The other idea is leverage partners. You don't try to do everything for everyone yourself. It just doesn't work. So I'd say there's a clear playbook. If that's followed to the T, you won't see a lot of this. But again, a lot of this, it's easier to talk about than really implementing. Because the other thing I'd say is, when you do the whole requirements, design as well, it's absolutely critical on how these things are cast in stone. Otherwise, what happens is, again, you get into a loop, and these are never-ending journeys that you go through. So yes, there's a clear playbook. We as Sapient have gone through this journey, and happy to discuss it further in detail with anyone who's interested.
The modernization has definitely advanced here in the region, and I think it's due to the forward-looking regulators such as SAMA and the CBUE are pushing, the traditional banks how to think about modernizing their platforms. And it's a great catalyst for positive change, I would say. However, we've seen that it also creates this strategic compromise. And then the question is, are we creating a compliance engine versus the growth engine? So that's going back to, having this gold-plated system that excels at reporting, but actually it fails when it comes to generating new revenue streams and new products that digital challenges do very well. So then if you think about the leadership in those organizations, the forward-looking leaders actually create not any more financial services proposals, but more of being a tech company that offers financial services. So they think very differently about their tech stack, how to modernize their technology altogether, and target rapidly some of those use cases that we mentioned earlier. So then you have a very different conversation. How do I become a tech company that can compete with the likes of most modern financial service providers, as well as technology players that are actually offering financial services in the market? And there are quite a few if you think about the use cases here that we're doing today, the likes of Tamara and Tabby and whatnot. They really excel at being digital first.
What we'd like to see when we talk about Speedboat is creating that separate digital venture, separate to your legacy bank. And the idea here is you're able to take the advantages of the balance sheet, of the regulatory license, of the brand of your bank, but at the same time, you're not dragged down by the policies, the culture, the organization structure, the tech legacy as well of your legacy banks. And that's key. Globally, and even in the region, we've seen two sides of the coin, and I've seen this personally as well. We've seen some of these Speedboat approaches work very well. We've seen some which don't go that so well. And if you really see, you look at the ones that have not gone that well, you try and look under the hood, that's probably because they've just tried to have digital front ends or digital products where they at the back end, they're still leveraging the legacy core, they're still leveraging the same processes, they're still leveraging the same compliance, the same tools as well. So you've not really changed anything. And that's why when you're looking at the Speedboat approach, again, absolutely critical in terms of why are you doing it? What's the value proposition? So for example, let's say you're looking at creating an SME lending platform or a digital AI first retail only bank. or a branch of a bank of UAE in Saudi Arabia. You need to be very laser focused in terms of what's that value proposition, what are those macro segments that you're looking at, what are those micro segments, what is that niche, how are you differentiating as well? Is it in terms of real-time lending? Is it in terms of account opening happening in, let's say, 2 minutes? Is it in terms of just your simple thing as pricing as well? So the strategy and approach needs to be crystal clear. The other aspect of the Speedboat is your costs have to be maintained here. And so, for example, you need to be looking at how can you leverage SaaS solutions? How do you have flexible vendor arrangements as well? Your processes, you need to ensure that, how do you ensure that you have the best lean processes, a very flat organization structure as well. So there's a number of these factors that you need to keep in mind when you look at this Speedboat approach, because otherwise you're just creating another venture just for the sake of creating it, and you're not really seeing any advantages from that.
Although I'm biased, I do empathize with them. You know, if you look at over the last 2 to 3 decades, the biggest risk I think was obviously the risk of a failure of that big bang. In today's day and age, I think the risk is not that anymore because the markets has shifted, therefore the risk has inverted as well. Their biggest challenge is the risk of inaction. So while, you know, you're moving forward and you're thinking, every month or every day that I'm not modernizing my platform, I'm staying further away from my clients' expectations. Because if you think about customers' expectations today and where the banking capability is, there is a big gap. And every month you are not actually modernizing, that gap becomes bigger and bigger and grows exponentially. So I think the conversation then becomes, a strategic conversation should be not what if we fail, it should be more, what if we don't change? What if we don't modernize? What happens then?
AI is not going to remain on the edges anymore. I would start seeing them embedded as part of the core. We're going to start seeing real-time risk monitoring, real-time credit scoring. So AI is going to be a key part. At the same time, agentic solutions, and we as Sapient leverage agentic solutions quite a bit. We're probably going to see agentic solutions not just on the back end, we're going to see it much more on the front as well, on the business side as well. So that's AI and agentic solutions. I'd also see banks in the region start pivoting more to this whole platform-based economy as well. So the whole ecosystem, everyday banking. And we're seeing banks do that already as well. But I think we're going to see it even more happening when the bank is really the core of this ecosystem, really owning that customer journey end to end. That's the other aspect. The whole modernization journey, we're going to see that continue for the next few years, front to back modernization journey as well. And I would say that this core modernization and legacy modernization, it's no longer just about keeping the lights on. Unless you really do it, getting your business operating and tech models coming together, you're not going to really see that new revenue models, the ecosystem play, and a real AI first experience going forward.